Everyone, welcome to another episode of the Caffeinated Christian Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Mike Rigglesworth, and I'm here with Ryan Willert. Ryan, how you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Can't complain.
Good. I'm a bit sleep deprived because we've had another round of sickness rolling through our house this week. So our daughter currently has a sinus infection. She's on medication for that. And our son got pink eye Tuesday, came home early from school, and was up all night with an ear infection last night between my wife and I. So that was so much fun. And so we've got like a little pharmacy in our house going right now. So it's just been nothing but excitement. But I really am excited about the...
Mike, selling them on,
What's that?
you're selling them on the street, making extra cash as a pastor, selling that stuff on the street.
That's not supposed to be public, okay? Yeah. But I really am excited. I really am excited about the guest that we have joining us today. Our guest today is Dan Trippie. Dan served as the founding pastor of Restoration Church in Buffalo, New York. He served there for 16 years. Dan has published books on marriage, family, religious freedom, and he's published several articles for academic journals as well. Dan holds a PhD in ethics from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary and an MDiv from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And now most recently, Dan has started or has begun work to launch the Center for Christian Thought and Ethics. And they seek to train men and women to integrate faith and reason into every sphere of culture. And CCTE, for short, aims to send Christ followers into academia, politics, business, the arts, and the church, equipped to live the cultural mandate expressed in Genesis 1:28 through 30. They work nationally to equip leaders and churches for cultural engagement. So Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. And I want to add one more category into that too.
Absolutely.
We also want to work with people in the trades. I think the trades are something that we often overlook when it comes to talking about the cultural mandate, and our role is integrating our faith. So I grew up in the trades, having a lot of affection for the trades, and excited to help tradesmen and women really see the connection in their faith and what they're doing for the kingdom.
Awesome.
Love it.
So in the trades as well. So Dan, we'll just get right into it. What led you to start the Center for Christian Thought and Ethics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you said, I had pastored a church for 16 years, wonderful church, Restoration Church. And through my experience of pastoral ministry and my education backgrounds, and then also my experience, like I said, in the business community and in a trades capacity, all of those kind of converged on me about 2 years ago in my heart and in my mind. And I started to recognize that my role as pastor was very incredibly important, but it was limited. And one of the things that was most limiting about my work as a pastor was, given the way our spiritual formation is, and Michael, you can appreciate this, you get your hands on people for about an hour to 2 hours every
Right.
month if they come to a Sunday service. And then if they're in a community group, you may get, another couple hours a month. When I started to look at it and say, I get 5 hours a month as a pastor to form people.
Right.
But where do they spend most of the time? Where do people live out their calling?
Mm.
They live that out in the workplace. They live that out in their academic spheres. They live that out in the arts, the entertainment world. So all these other places seem to have just more practical, accessible time to form people. And it started to resonate in my heart. What if we could do more to equip the people in those spaces? So I found one of the frustrating things, and maybe you can resonate this, as a pastor, I just didn't have enough time. One, I didn't have enough time preparing a sermon every week, and
Yeah.
and for lack of a better term, running the church. I didn't have enough time to then really get in and engage in some of the places where culture is forming people. So that was really what started to germinate in me. And then, of course, I hit some of those magic ages in your life. You hit 50 years old and you start to look and say, I think you really start to recognize what are the things that only I can do, right? What did God call me to, and how do I live into that calling? And that's what really started to give birth to the vision for the Center for Christian Thought and Ethics.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the important, I should say, biblical context for your CCTE, can I call it that? Would that be easier just to
Sure. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. CCTE.
Is the cultural mandate found in Genesis 1's, particularly verses 28 through 30? Can you unpack why this mandate is so vital for your what you're doing over there in the CCTE?
Yeah, absolutely. So, right, you get this record from God that as He creates men and women in their own image, a God who's already He's being creating, right? The first
Sure.
part of Genesis 1 is God creating. And then He creates man and woman in His image, and they're vice agents. And then God tells them the very first thing He tells them to do is to image me in the creative process. First, procreation, right? Have children, but then He turns them loose into what He has created. He says, now go create human flourishing. Go till the world. Reorder this world. Order this world in such a way that it's going to point to the glory and the magnitude and the magnificence of my glory. And He sends them out to do that. Um, it's interesting when you read Genesis 1, 2, 3, right? We see the fall that happens in Genesis chapter 3. But when God sends Adam and Eve out of the garden, He doesn't revoke this
Yeah.
cultural mandate. It doesn't go away. It's going to have toil now. It's going to be a little more difficult to do, but they're still sent out to subdue the culture, to order the culture, and to order it towards His glory.
Yeah.
Now, in doing that, I think this is one of the greatest expressions of love that the Christian can do. In ordering it towards His glory, we're actually bringing flourishing to our neighborhoods. Now, I think if I can just touch on that for a minute, I'll go forever. So you'll feel free to tap me out. The word flourishing is a word that's used. I find it being used an awful lot today.
Hmm.
And we tend to think of the word of flourishing. If you read medical journals, you'll hear about flourishing in the realm of health, right? That flourishing is good health, um, or health, then physical health or mental health. And we often stop there. But what's missing from that is spiritual health.
Mm.
So part of the cultural mandate is, yeah, to order things towards healthy living in our physical realm, right? So ordering things for the good of creation, the good of humans physically, uh,
Yeah.
mental health, right? We should be ordering things towards a healthy mental health. And we see the breakdown of this all over our society today. But what's often missing is spiritual health. And I think that's what we're living into right now, which is
Mhm.
some of what animates this world work. We're living in a real vacuum of uh,
Yeah.
spiritual meaning,
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
broadly. So using my time and my energy, not just myself, but I have some other scholars that are going to be joining me in this work, but using this towards um, these different institutions. So the medical institution, health, right? When we think about the different academic institution, right? Mental health and
Mm.
growing it, but also we sit in the middle of the church, right? So academic, work, public policy,
Mm.
politics. Sitting in the middle of this is you've got the church, and then what CCT wants to do is come alongside and help pastors. One of the frustrations I would often have as a pastor is I just didn't have time to sit and research and study and to then strategize how to do some of these things. So we want to provide a service to pastors and to the local church and to business owners and others.
Yeah. Mike, do you mind if I ask a question to follow up on that real fast before you jump?
Sure.
Go for it.
So it's interesting that you said that. I've been starting to get into what a Christian worldview looks like in relationship to politics and things like that. And I'm in the middle of this book right here, Jesus and the Powers by N.T. Wright and Michael Bird.
Mm.
Um, and they basically agree with everything you're saying right here. And my question for you is, where do you think the disconnect started? Because when you look at the cultural mandate in Genesis, you see that we are still priests and prophets to the world that we're supposed to sort of go out into. And why is there just this strong disconnect where it's almost like the church wants to, in a sense, separate itself from everything with regard to being that it just in
Yeah.
their everyday life. So where do you think the disconnect is?
Yeah, I'm going to speculate on this, but I think there's
No.
something in the fact that you had so as we had the rise of Christianity and then the Christendom that took place, right, with Constantine's conversion,
Mm,
however you understand that to be, there was a movement then more towards um, let's get out of culture in some ways. You had the monastic movement starting to happen. You have the Catholic movement where that which is spiritual was elevated over that which was physical. So uh, in some ways, you had some of Platonic thought coming in.
mm,
Augustine was a Neoplatonist, so you have some of this coming in where you have an increase in focus on spirituality and a decrease on the human body. So then you follow that trajectory, you get to the Protestant Reformation, and there's some retooling with that, right? There's some reordering of that. We get a better understanding. Uh, Luther is talking about the importance of work. Calvin talking about the importance of work, that you get the Protestant work ethic, you get all of that. But then you have something that starts to happen at the Enlightenment. You start to get a bit of a disconnect now away from the spiritual and more of an increase towards the physical. So you have these two poles that start to happen. And I think what you've had then after that, Nas Guinness writes about this in a book that he did called The Call. And I think Oz is right here. What you start to get is an elevation of work disconnected from its spiritual significance. So then we become workaholics. We find our significance in this. Right. That's the one extreme.
Mhm.
Or we go to the Catholic, I think the Catholic problem where we elevate spiritual work and we kind of denigrate, some of the everyday work, right? And I mean that broadly speaking, right? Because you have many good Catholic thinkers that recognize this, but you had this move towards a monastic, priest is separate from the community, and then the other way was, well, my work is separate from my spirituality,
mhm,
and I see that a full orb view of the gospel is this is both. And I'd
mhm,
give you even some, and Michael, I'm sure that you've encountered this. I
Mhm.
often would find in my work as a pastor, people who are really successful and they hit a certain point of their life and they're like, okay, I've got the money now, I've got the resources, I've got the time. Now I want to go into ministry because I want to do something significant. Or
Mhm.
somebody who's in their job and they're not really happy with their job and they're like, if I could just get into a church position. And I'm like, no,
Mhm.
like you're a business owner, you have influence.
mhm.
Mhm.
You use that as a place of spiritual formation. No,
Yeah.
you're in the office, or you're in the shop, you're in the mechanic shop, you're at the
Yeah.
wherever it may be. Not only do you have influence to do gospel proclamation, but through your hands, through your mind, through
Yeah.
your work is something that can be sacred,
Yeah.
that contributes to the cultural mandate. So
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I've had conversations with people who feel that way. There's that sense of, I think, longing for people to be in full-time ministry as if that's the ultimate goal, or they see full-time vocational pastoral ministry as something higher or more spiritual than what they're
yeah,
doing. And yeah, I do think that that's problematic, especially if you look at the biblical witness. You look at Ephesians 4 and you see that, you know, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers, we're meant to equip people for works of ministry. So the ministry was never meant to be relegated to just the pastors. Church leaders are there to help people to do the ministry. And so it's a very different way from how many of us have been conditioned in if we grew up in the evangelical church, because the ministers do all the ministry. That's what
Yeah.
we pay the pastors to do. Where it's no, it's the pastors, the ministers. They're there to help you, equip you to do ministry in your context. So absolutely.
and one of the things that I'd often find in that is So we would take people's spiritual gifts and we use their spiritual gifts, and we only look at those gifts as a blessing for the church community,
Right.
in which they are. But Paul says that this is for the building up of the church
Mhm.
and the common good. So your
Mhm.
spiritual
Yeah.
giftedness is something, you're to give that away. You're to give that away to your employer. You're to give that away to your community.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yeah. So Dan, there's two questions. So I'll start with this. What does it look like for Christians? So we're talking about how do they live out their faith in these various spheres of their life, right? And so let's talk specifically about academia and politics. Those are those are two spheres that are they're quite polarizing to say the least. So how does somebody live out their faith in today's climate in those two contexts? So let's start there. What does that look like?
yeah, I think they both start with um, Christian thinking,
Mhm.
Hmm.
right? So when we're in academia, um, right, you're engaging different ideas, and I think it's been to the detriment of the church in some ways, right? You had coming out of the fundamentalist movement in the mid 20th century, where you had people leave academia and vacate that space instead of going in with ideas. So
Mhm.
I think, what does it mean to live that out? Well, I think we need to formulate um, good logical arguments. I think we need to be okay to listen to ideas that we may find them uh, completely antithetical to our Christian beliefs, but yet by listening to understand, not for agreement, but I listen to understand. I'm understanding um, where there are inherent inconsistencies, and then I can help apply gospel into that. I think Nancy Percy,
Mhm.
Os Guinness, Francis Schaeffer, they were all talking about this, right? So we can do this, and what I've found is if we're not offensive, but we are bold and we enter into those spaces, people are willing to have a dialogue. They're willing to discuss. So I think that's number one. Number two, when it comes to politics, I think the best way for Christians to live out their faith in politics is um, again learning to understand where what the cultural logic is that's animating a lot of the
Mhm.
political debate, right? So politics, people push back. I don't want to do politics. I don't like politics. But politics is just, it's about the ordering, back to Genesis 1, the ordering of a community in which it's going to flourish,
Mhm.
right? Towards its flourishing. That's what we're doing in politics. We're saying in politics, most of the time, what we have going on is we have competing goods.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So I think one of the ways we live our faith out is we present why the goods that Christians feel are essential for human flourishing, connect the dots for people, right? It's hard for us to expect people who don't have a Christian framework or even thinking anymore to understand our ethics.
Yeah.
So I
Sure.
think we need to put our ethics out there in such a way that they're beautiful and they're good and they're true, and we can show people, well, this leads to human flourishing, not just in a spiritual sense, but in a physical and a practical sense. This logically makes more sense. We're
Mhm.
not very good at making those arguments, so then we fall to where it's just, well, I'm just going to try to um, bowl you over, right? I'm just going to try to roll over you
Hmm.
Yeah.
instead of, we got to persuade people, right?
Right.
That's the thing. You're going to have to persuade.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and
that's good.
persuasion can come from, like you said, both intellect as well as the emotional aspect.
Hmm.
And I think a good Christian needs to be able to be prepped with both. Both come, as you said, with the arguments as well as point to the beautiful. And I just see that running throughout all of Scripture, since that makes up who we are, both of those things. So,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's right, Ryan. I mean, it's certainly not without emotion, but we don't want to fully just make arguments based on emotion. And it's also
sure.
not just, it's just not pure, cold, calculated rationalism, too. This is, I care for my neighbor, which incites some kind of, it should incite some kind of empathy and compassion
Yeah.
for my
Yeah,
neighbor.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I like the quote that like we don't necessarily have to agree with somebody's conclusions about something, but we should be willing to hear their concerns. And
Mhm.
I think too often we've focused so much on the conclusion that they've come to that we're not trying to understand the shared humanity, because 9 times out of 10, the concern that they have is the same concern that you have about a particular issue. They just arrived at a different conclusion. And Good. Now, I know you started to kind of answer this question a little bit earlier, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about how do we navigate the challenges of standing firm in our convictions as followers of Jesus, like being bold and being confident in what we believe about Jesus, about the gospel, about truth claims that are presented in the scriptures, at the same time engaging in dialogue with people who are believe very different.
Yeah, I mean, it starts first with seeing the humanity in them, right? You still go back to Genesis chapter 1. Everybody's made in the image of God. When I start to listen to other people, even those I don't have a lot of agreement with, but I understand this is a rational being made in the image of God.
Yeah.
And they didn't form their beliefs in a vacuum. Those beliefs were formed through experience in some ways. Those, you know, engaging things that were done to them, things that were done for them, all those things, those experiences help form people's most meaningful beliefs. When I start to understand that and listen to what animates that belief, um, it ratchets down some of the charged
Mm.
debate, and it starts to build in what we call empathy.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about empathy: it goes two ways, right? Again, and I'm not talking about giving into emotionalism, right? Or motivism. I'm talking about just listening to somebody who's made in the image of God. When I do that, I'm recognizing dignity in them,
Mhm.
building receptivity. Well, now I have an opportunity. Most people, when you'll start in that place, are willing to hear why you hold the beliefs you hold. But I think too many times maybe we start first with here are the propositions, you must believe these. Let me convince you of them. And I'm not going to listen to your concerns because I'm afraid that I'm somehow endorsing your beliefs. Well, I'm not. I'm just trying to understand them and learn them. Again,
Right.
it's not new. I mean, I have a great amount of. He's a mentor of mine through books, right? But Francis Schaeffer was talking about this, you know,
Mhm.
and recognizing that I'm talking to another human being,
Mhm.
and I can understand where they're coming from. But
Mm.
now let me share a little bit about my beliefs. People are willing to dialogue on that. At least I found that to be the case. And I found it to be the case in some of the most bizarre spaces that you wouldn't expect them to believe.
Oh yeah.
To invite you in, I should say.
Yeah, just to add a little story to some of the principles that you were talking about. A few months back, my wife and I went out on an impromptu date. My in-laws were watching our kids, and we went to this little bar restaurant in the area, and it happened to be trivia night. And it was quiet for the first couple of minutes we were there, and then everybody started flooding into this space for trivia night, and there was these two guys that came in with their dog with this mass group of people, and it was a gay couple, very clearly a gay couple. And they sit down at the table next to us, and one of the guys is just extremely chatty, and he starts talking to my wife and I, and he asks her first, like, "What do you do?" And she's like, "I'm a teacher," and she shares a little bit about that, and he looks at me and he says, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Okay, this is about to get interesting," and I tell him I'm a pastor, and he just goes right into it. He's like, "All right, so what do you believe about like homosexuality and about all that stuff?" And I shared with them just basically that I hold to the biblical ethic of sexuality and marriage, and I explained to him just a little bit about what that is, and he didn't fight me. He didn't push against my belief. He's just acknowledged it and said, "Okay." And I heard him, he heard me. The conversation didn't go beyond that, but we ended up we ended up being on their trivia team, and they were actually really pleasant people. But if I came into that conversation with guns blazing, trying to convince him of my side, and not that you can't do that, but if that's how I started the conversation, I don't know if we ever would have had that opportunity to make that initial connection. So yeah, it's just having that level of sensitivity and recognizing somebody's humanity, and that they actually are more willing to hear your perspective than you might initially think, you know.
And yeah, that's incredible to hear, Michael, because not only is it okay, I'm having an opportunity to proclaim my beliefs, but in listening to where he's coming from,
Mhm.
what we're actually doing is helping to stitch up our republic, because our republic is built on the free expression of ideas
Yeah.
and public discourse, and we've so lost that typically what happens is, what do you do?
Hmm.
Kind of skirt around that a little bit, or somebody's like,
Yep.
I don't want to share my beliefs because
Right.
so I'm either not bringing all of myself into the conversation,
Yep.
and I'm hiding something,
Hmm.
which is a breakdown of our democratic system,
Sure.
Yeah.
right? Because it's built on the free exchange of ideas. Um, So there's a lot more going on. Yeah, it's not less than evangelism, but there's more than just pure um, proclamation evangelism that's going on. There's a restitching up of our republic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, could you, for a little bit, share some of the ways CCTE is training the men and women that come to you to live out this vision in the cultural environment engagement?
Yeah. So right now, again, we're on the early stages of launching, but what we're going to do, we bought the name thinkchristian.com. So look for that in the next days and weeks to launch. Obviously, it'll be our website, but we're going to have is classes on that website. There'll be remote classes, not they're not accredited, but what we'll be doing is doing some training through that.
Mm.
We'll also be doing for pastors a couple different things. One, we'll be able to do just some white papers for you on the issues that like you may be encountering in the field. So you may not have time to take and go research that. We'll take that, we'll research it, have that for you. But then what
Mm.
we're going to be doing is putting a narrative together, a way that so there's an academic piece, but then there's a popular level piece where, hey, this is how you talk about this, right? So that'll be one area. We're also doing some trainings in local churches, so have some things on the calendar for the fall this year. We're going to come in and be doing some ethics training. When I say ethics training, we're just going to help people to think first through, how do I handle some of the moral dilemmas that are facing our society, but more than just an intellectual discussion about this, we're going to give people practical language. So here's how you can talk about this. Um, Again, everybody's knows somebody and loves somebody that's that may be suffering or through like these moments where we're clashing over these moral issues, and when we try to step in and talk, we're actually doing more damage than good. So we want to help people, give them some narrative on how to do that. So that'll be one way we're going to be doing that, and then we're also going to be working to convene social labs. So social labs are an idea where we bring together leaders from those institutions, those five pillars of our culture. We bring them together and we do a survey to find out what is the most pressing issue that you're facing. Now, these leaders are predominantly going to be Christian leaders, although not exclusively, but we're going to be looking for Christian leaders. What we're going to be doing then is taking a survey of some of the problems that they're facing in the culture. We'll go back and we have a team of researchers that will research from not just the biblical times, but all the way through Christian history. Similar to what you had said, hey, when do you think that this got off the rails? Well, if you look
Sure.
through Christian history, you can see some trends. We'll go back, research that, put that into a narrative for the social lab, and then we'll work with those leaders to actually move forward into help solving problems.
So I know you said that the website is not up yet, and I know we'll update our listeners continuously through this process. Can you at least give us a rough timing frame that you think so they can keep it in the back of their mind once you start going to the thinkchristian.com?
Yeah, our goal is by the end of Q2 this year, so we'll be looking at early summer, or I'm sorry, early to late summer. We hope to have at least some content material up.
Okay,
Awesome.
great.
Awesome. Awesome. I did have one question that was not on the list of questions that we gave you, if that's okay.
Sure.
One of
I like 90% that right now. So you're
so one of the primary contexts that people are engaging in this type of dialogue is through social media. And we can go on a totally separate sort of rabbit trail on the goods and evils of social media. But for the sake of this conversation here, I'm just curious, are there specific ways that you would advise people to meaningfully and constructively engage with people who are have different worldviews and beliefs around some of these more serious moral issues that you're trying to address with CCTE? Have any practical tips for them?
Yeah, capture people the way they want to be captured, right? Their ideas. So I
Sure.
think one of the things that we do is social media is a horrible platform for some of this
I know.
because you're just not able to hold the nuance.
Hmm.
So work hard at that. I would say if you're going to engage in that, try to capture the other person, use their words, ask them to explain more about what they mean by that concept. Try to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think
Right.
one of the things that social media does is we take one thing that we hear, we go heretic hunting. If we're Christians, we're trying to find, you know, so try represent people honestly. I think that's
Mhm.
important in this as Christians, right?
Yeah.
We need to represent
Yeah.
people honestly, represent their views honestly, seek to be curious
Yeah.
um, before, I don't think social media is. I've yet to meet somebody who said, I read this tweet and I just totally changed my mind. I'm voting Trump because of this, or I'm voting the other way because of that. Don't see a lot of that through social media, a lot of mind changing. So maybe use it as a platform to gain further understanding. And then offline, I would say try to reach out to somebody offline. Go, hey,
Yeah.
you said this. I want to make sure I fully get you. I fully capture what you
Yeah.
are getting at. Um, Tell me more. Be
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
Good. Good. So as we wrap up here, Dan, do you have any final thoughts or any words of encouragement to people who are maybe just feeling a bit overwhelmed or discouraged by, living out their faith in today's culture? What would you like to say to them?
Oh, I would say this is a great time to live our faith out in the culture.
Hmm.
I mean, this is like this right now is probably one of the most exciting periods of time I think you could live in since the New Testament. I mean, we're living in a time where the where the Christian message now we've become a repaganized culture. So the Christian message on sexuality, on human flourishing, on just health and life, all of these things are really compellingly different compared to what, like, one of the things you have under a society that's largely Christian-ish is you have these symbols stripped of their meaning. But
Yeah.
now we get to live into a time where, well, no, this is what a Christian marriage looks like. This is what Christian singleness looks like. This is what a Christian vocation looks like. I think it stands out, and
Yeah.
it's in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, in the closing, I believe chapter 12, it talks about when the sky grows dark is when you see the stars. And I feel like the darker the culture gets, the more that we get to see the light, the stars of the Christian faith piercing through. So be of good cheer. This is a great time to be alive, right?
Amen. Amen. We are in interesting times. We will say that too. Yes,
For
absolutely.
sure.
Good. Well, Dan, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. We greatly look forward to the launch of CCTE and thinkchristian.com. We are just grateful for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
If people do want to find out a little bit more about you and your work, I know you're working on launching the website, but where can they find you in the meantime?
They can go to dantrippie.com. I do some blogging there. That website will move more to probably a more pastoral, devotional type help site, and then more the academic and ethical work will probably move. It will move over to the Center for Christian Thought and Ethics. But dantrippie.com. There's an email. The email address is dan@dantrippie.com. You can email me there too.
All right, nice and simple. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, again, Dan, thank you so much for your time. And listeners, watchers, thank you for tuning into another episode of The Caffeinated Christian. Be sure to like, watch, share, subscribe, all the things to get the word out there. We would love to hear from you. You could reach us on social media, Facebook or Instagram. It's at The Caffeinated Christian, at The Caffeinated Christian. You could also find us on YouTube, and we regularly read and pore over the comment section there as well. And we want to thank you so much for listening or watching. And until next time, have a great day.